Hi there, Daily Gardeners. Jennifer Ebling here. I just want to give a quick shout out to the folks who have left a review for the show over on Podchaser during the month of April. I want to give a heartfelt thanks to Minnie Garrett, Valerie Tropical Gardener, Matthew Sartor, and @Bringer. Thank you so much for leaving a review for the show, especially during the month of April. You know, this month, all month long, Podchaser is willing to donate 25 cents for every time a podcast gets reviewed over on their website. And then when I reply to that review, they double that contribution. And so with your help, for each review and reply, Podchaser will donate 50 cents to World Central Kitchen, which is the organization where chefs provide meals to people fleeing Ukraine. So hats off to Podchaser for picking such a great cause. If you have a chance and can leave a review for The Daily Gardener over at podchaser.com, it's so easy to do and so much good can come from it. Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is April 25th. It's National Zucchini Bread Day. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of the English clergyman and daffodil breeder George Herbert Engleheart, who was born on this day, April 25th in 1851. Well, way back in 1889, George began breeding daffodils, a plant he was a fanatic about, and he grew over 700 varieties in his lifetime. And fans of Beersheba or Lucifer or the White Lady Daffodil owe a great debt of gratitude to Reverend Engleheart. In fact, George spent every spare minute breeding, and his parishioners would often arrive at his church to find a note tacked to the church door saying this: "No service today, working with daffodils." And today we also celebrate the birthday of the American geologist, mining engineer, and botanist Marcus Jones, who was born on this day, April 22nd in 1852. Marcus's mother loved plants, and every day she would send a young Marcus out to gather fresh flowers, which she then displayed on the family mantle. And it was this daily chore that was the beginning of Marcus's passion for botany. Now, Marcus became a prominent botanist of the American West, and in 1923, he sold his personal herbarium for about $25,000, which was an impressive amount at the time. And to this day, the Marcus Jones collection is the largest archive of plants from Utah. Marcus died in 1934 in San Bernardino, California, at the age of 81. He was returning from a plant collecting trip at Lake Arrowwood when his car was hit by another driver. And since seatbelts wouldn't be invented for another 25 years, Marcus died from a skull fracture after being ejected from his vehicle. Today, the Jones Columbine is named for Marcus Jones. Botanically speaking, it's known as Aquilegia jonesii. Now, this columbine is a rare columbine, and like most columbines, it does not transplant well. So keep that in mind when you're out in your garden this spring and you see a columbine pop up in an undesirable area. Well, if you intend on moving it, you may just as well dig it up and throw it away, because that's how hard it is to transplant a columbine. All right, and today we also celebrate the English-Australian botanist Joseph Henry Maiden, who was born on this day, April 25th in 1925. Born in London, Joseph emigrated to New South Wales, Australia, and he was hoping that the climate there would improve his health. He quickly landed a job as a museum curator in Sydney, and he also married a local woman named Eliza Hammond. Now, during his time in Australia, Joseph made a significant contribution to understanding Australian flora, especially when it came to the eucalyptus genus. He also wrote a book called The Useful Native Plants of Australia. And in 1896, just before the turn of the century, Joseph was appointed as the director of the Sydney Botanic Gardens. And in total, he served as an Australian botanist for over 4 decades. Now, as for his Australian legacy, Joseph is remembered every September 1st, which is the first day of spring down under. It's also known as Wattle Day or Acacia Day because in Australia, the wattle is the common name for acacia. Now, Joseph loved the acacia. He recognized their beauty and their value, and so he established a group known as the Wattle Day League. And this group of citizens fought to make the golden wattle, or the acacia pycnantha, Australia's national floral emblem. And while he was at it, Joseph also worked to establish Wattle Day. Now, the very first Wattle Day was celebrated over 100 years ago in 1909. And every year on Wattle Day, Australians wear a wattle blossom, which looks like a little yellow pom-pom. Now, as plants, wattles are tough evergreen shrubs and trees that can withstand the Australian climate. They can handle the drought, the winds, and the brush fires. And by the way, the wattle blossom is also a favorite of pollinators. Now, you might be wondering about the origin of the word wattle. Well, it refers to an old Germanic term for weaving and the English craft of weaving together flexible twigs and branches. And as the English were settling in Australia, they often harvested wattle or acacia and used it in their building construction. And so there you go. That's how acacias came to be called wattles. And here's a fun fact about wattles, or acacia. Giraffes love to eat them, something a garden designer discovered when he designed an African landscape for Disney at one of their theme parks. He couldn't keep enough wattles or acacia growing because the giraffes would just eat them down to nothing. All right, and today we also celebrate the English poet, short story writer, and novelist Walter de la Mare, who was born on this day, April 25th in 1873. Walter is best remembered for his children's works, including his poem called Peacock Pie, which ends with these words: "Weeps she never, but sometimes sighs, and peeps at her garden with bright brown eyes. And all she has is all she needs, a poor old widow in her weeds." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Essential Garden Design Workbook by Rosemary Alexander and Rachel Myers. This book came out in 2017, and the subtitle is Completely Revised and Expanded. Well, the original version of this book was a best-selling classic, and so this is the upgraded book that came out 5 years ago. And in this book, you have the eminent designer and educator Rosemary Alexander teaming up with rising design star Rachel Myers. And what these two women did is they share new garden plans, a ton of new photos and diagrams, and updated profiles of their 50 top plants that they think are timeless and that should be used by today's designers. So there's all kinds of wonderful modern tips and advice in this book. If you're interested in sustainability or plant diversity, well then this book is a really good design book for that. And it's also great if you're trying to incorporate computer-aided design into your planning, or if you want to start your own garden design business. So this book will walk you through the entire design process. Now, of course, nowadays, you don't have to be an artist to be a landscape designer or to convey what you want to do with a particular garden or a job site. But you do need to know how to do the basics. You have to be able to somehow survey a site and draw a plan to scale, or to use the right software in order to do that. And then if you're making a bigger presentation, maybe to a company or to an arboretum, you'll need to include specific details, visuals, maybe even a mood board and of course costing if you want to land their proposal. And so this book gives you everything, soup to nuts, on garden design. And as Rosemary says, she believes that garden design is one of the most satisfying and rewarding professions. And I have many friends who would agree with her. Now, when Gardens Illustrated reviewed this book, they said the attention to detail at every stage is fantastic. Even if you don't want to be a designer, this book is worth having. This book is a big one. It is 392 pages of garden design for students, professionals, and anyone who is looking to create a well-designed outdoor space. You can truly learn from the experts, and they will share it in detail here. You can get a copy of the Essential Garden Design Workbook by Rosemary Alexander and Rachel Myers, and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $16. Finally, we end the show today with a Botanic Spark that celebrates the birthday of the American author and botanist Julia Frances McHugh Morton, who was born on this day, April 25th in 1912. A fellow of the Linnaean Society, Julia Morton was a popular expert and lecturer on plants, and she was revered especially for her knowledge of plant medicine and toxicity. She became known as the Poison Plant Lady, and she worked to educate the public through letters, phone calls, lectures, and articles, and she even created posters that were used in hospital emergency rooms. So she was truly cutting edge in her time. Now, among the many emergency room calls that she received, one was from a doctor in Scotland after a patient who had just gone on a holiday in Jamaica came home and was gravely ill. And when they couldn't get to the bottom of it, they reached out to Julia, who deduced that a noxious castor bean from a souvenir necklace had been ingested. Now, over the years, Julia was the subject of many newspaper articles, and I loved researching Julia because there were so many clever headlines that showcased her expertise. One said, "She gets to the root of problems," and another one said, "She leaves no leaf unturned." In 1988, the Miami News published an article about Julia's help with a murder case that involved a teenage girl. The girl's car was found in the Dadeland Mall parking lot, and the police brought Julia a half-inch blade of grass. Can you imagine? A half-inch blade of grass that was stuck to the door handle of a car. And they also brought her some pieces of leaves that were wedged inside the car. Well, Julia went to work, and she identified the grass as giant Burma reed. And then the leaves she identified as undeveloped leaflets of Spanish needles. And through this discovery, Julia concluded that a short distance from the Dadeland Mall, perhaps near a nursery, in a tall patch of Burma reed, police just might find the body of the girl. And by the way, and in addition to that, Julia predicted that there were two killers. She correctly assumed that one probably had wet hands and had left the Burma reed on the driver door, while the other suspect likely closed the passenger door so quickly that it clipped the Spanish needles. Well, Julia was totally correct, because the next morning, the police found an area that matched Julia's description, and they solved their case. Just brilliant. Well, sadly, like Marcus Jones from earlier in the show, Julia Morton died in a car accident in 1996. She was 84 years old. And I thought I'd end the show today with something rather poignant that Julia said about her work with plants. Plants are always up to something, so I don't take a vacation. I operate on solar energy. I can only stay indoors for a certain length of time. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.